Welcome to another episode of Hangouts with Hess and Yates, I think is what we're calling this series.
Is it?
Um, that's what you showed up for, right? You're in the right room. Welcome, Tone. If you are joining us, you know the drill. If you let us know you're here in the comments, we'll say hello. Get the community feel going. Just another quick note. If you know anyone who is interested in improving our effectiveness as animal advocates, or who has studied the work specifically of Gary Francione, will be responding to some recent webinar he did today. Drop him a personal message with a link to the show, and let's see if we can bring as many people to this discussion as possible, because I think that's just going to make it richer having more different viewpoints. In the next hour, we'll be talking about, we're going to be touching on a number of issues, but I think the big question is the movement confused? I think that's an important question to try to address. What do you think, Roger? Is the movement confused?
Well, I think we know somebody who would say it is. Yeah.
Well, we might as well just sign off right there. 90 seconds. It'll be our quickest show yet. With the outro, keep it under 2 minutes.
From New York City and Debbie, howdy. They're both from the States. So, yeah.
Yeah, hello.
Our thread's been invaded already.
But yeah, we're also, I think misanthropy and the pandemic might come up a bit today through some of the threads, but for the main part of the show, we're going to be responding, as I say, to a webinar, but it's really not a critique of Francione's work. It's more using that as a catalyst to really build on the discussion. So if you came here for a critique of Francione's work specifically, you're going to be disappointed, because I think we were talking before the show. I think we largely agree with most of the things said. So it's really just to provide a bit of a third point of communication. Hello, Bernie and Nella.
It was a useful thing, wasn't it? Because it just brought up loads of movement issues, which are, it's ironic because Francione claims not to be in the movement, but his kind of webinar did bring up loads of movement issues, which we thought we could build on and use, so that's what it was.
Yeah, and I think just a bit of a piece of news. I know, Roger, you've already done a live stream this year, haven't you? With Ronnie just a couple days ago?
Yes, we undressed, deconstructed, and peeled away the corners of 2020. But,
a few corners there to peel away.
Yeah, well, it was Ronnie's idea. He wanted to go through the good, the bad, and we ended up calling it the bloody awful. And so we started off with all the activists who had died. And of course, I think everybody knew Regan Russell, but there was another 4 examples, and I don't think anybody knew them. And so Ronnie was able to fill everybody in with the details, which was really interesting, including people like John Bryant. I suppose John Bryant was the biggest name, as it were, of the other people who had died during the year. And then we moved to COVID. And then Ronnie said that he quite liked some of the aspects of the lockdowns, which I think is pretty true, like clear skies and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and another point that it relates to, as animal advocates, I think most of us associate this month with Veganuary. Love it or hate it, it comes around every year. So I think
it's a cultural tradition now, isn't it? A cultural tradition.
What's that?
It's a
cultural tradition, yeah. Well, it's interesting because I know in our team chat, Tom shared an article, didn't he, around how 10 MPs are actually doing it this year. And I saw an article, that the one he shared, that said that they're doing a part of the proud tradition of veganism in the UK, which presumably that's in relation to the Vegan Society starting here in 44. But it looks like the numbers are good too, at 440,000 already, and signing up one person every second. So by the time we do the show, that's a lot more people signed up, isn't it?
Actually, Jeremy, I didn't realize that you were actually quoting somebody. I thought you were being sarcastic when you wrote that. But
me sarcastic, never.
But so that was actually from the press release or the coverage, then, was it?
Yeah, I believe it was a Telegraph, but they've got one of those things that you try to read the article and then a thing covers 80% of your screen saying, sign up now for a subscription. I'm like, yeah, all right, I guess I'm limited to the title on this one. But yeah, I think to your point, the pandemic, obviously this has been a very unique year for all of us. And I think it's interesting looking through the lens of Veganuary, which, we could discuss that a little bit, but just specifically in regards to the pandemic. I know for me, one of the biggest barriers to overcome when I started living vegan was social situations. And interestingly, that's, largely been removed, at least for, here in the, UK, we're locked down, and I believe a lot of other places around the world. So if you wanted to start living vegan, maybe this is a good time to be pushing for that, because that takes away one more barrier and kind of, make it that much easier to kind of get started.
Yeah.
Plus,
Actually,
who doesn't want to try more new recipes when you're stuck at home? Might as well make it a bit exciting.
yeah, well, that's what been one of the features of the lockdown, that people have started to cook again and bake and stuff, which has been a kind of new thing. Obviously, we've got a generation of takeaway people and all the rest of it and stuff. Although, of course, we've got a big tradition now of all these cookery programs and stuff. I've never seen a single one of those, but I know they're kind of everywhere. But we did talk about Veganuary on the Ronnie show, if you like, the Ronnie kind of 2020 show. And I did say then, and we just had a quick look at the website, or I did about 10 minutes ago. I really would like to see a lot more of vegan philosophy and ethics and that there. It does seem overwhelmingly plant-based, and I think that they could probably. I mean, I think that obviously they're stuck with the name, and the name is kind of catchy and everything, which is interesting because people had to get used to saying Veganuary. A lot of journalists couldn't say it at the beginning. Whereas I think a lot of their claims making, they ought to kind of, instead of try vegan, I think they ought to be, try plant-based, and to make sure that people understand right from the off, there's a bit of a difference between plant-based and vegan. I think that would help to serve the cause, I think, to be honest.
Yeah, and just great to see some familiar names and some new ones. Here we've got Kristen. Good to see you again, Mom, a loyal supporter. Sam, Karen, great to see you. We do some animal work together. Yeah, Vegan Gays, Linda. I think that's everyone for the moment. But I think, I don't know, maybe it sounds like we have a pretty strong business case for us doing a cooking show together, Roger. What do you think? Maybe
No,
we can take it into the kitchen one episode?
No. Yes, Sam says nice to have normalized wearing face masks too for the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that angle of things too. Well, yeah, I think it's an interesting one because it is. I think we want to make the barrier for people to start living vegan achievable, but then we also want to sell the long-term ethics, like you say. I mean, because when we're looking at together, there's a lot of numbers of pictures of individuals on their website too, which I think helps counteract that food focus. Which, let's be honest, when we start living vegan, the dietary aspect is one of the biggest to kind of overcome, because that's a daily thing that we all have to do unless we're fasting, I guess. So there's that side of it. But without ado, I mean, I think we've got a number of clips teed up, which I think are really going to be the heart of this conversation. Roger's done a great job finding some of these clips from this webinar it was just at the end of the year, wasn't it? With I believe it was the Philosopher. But yeah, it's Gary Francione with Adam Ferner and Darren Chetney, and really the whole idea, like I say, is just to keep the conversation going on these topics. It's really not, yeah.
I think Gary Francione didn't get the memo that you need to have a big beard to appear on that show. But as we'll see, and I just want to make a quick personal note, is that I've got a bit of a croaky voice. I'm assuming it's just a sniffle, folks. But yeah, I woke up with a bit of a kind of croaky voice, so that's why I'm chewing something. So please excuse.
It's not because you're cross at me, at least this time.
No, I'm chewing tobacco. Yeehaw! Ding.
All right, with that, let's get into it. So this is first clip. The clips are around a minute or two each. We'll play one and then we'll unpack it as a group. You may like to turn up your volume a little bit because it looks like it rendered on their side a little bit on the low side, but there's also captions if you prefer to read along. So let's do it.
Well, actually, Jeremy, do you think?
I think a big problem.
What's that?
I wonder whether would it be worth highlighting the topics that are going to come up, or just let them go and then say what the topics were? What do you think? Sorry, I should have raised this about 3 hours ago. Sorry about that.
I think just play them. I mean, the first one, I mean, we can talk a little bit about, it's about basically begging the question is the animal movement selling compassionate exploitation? I think is probably the key question to think about through this clip.
Okay.
Problem we have is the animal movement. I mean,
such a minority And I think then about, I guess I'm more involved with anti-racism and thinking about how simply having the argument that racism making progress do.
All right, here we go.
I mean, I think a big problem we have is the animal movement. I mean, as a matter of fact, I think the animal movement is the biggest impediment to veganism being more widely accepted than it is. I mean, we've got a zillion of these charities. I mean, they're basically businesses that are selling the idea that there's such a thing as compassionate exploitation. So, you know, I mean, I encounter this all the time. As a matter of fact, this is the idea, the thing that I encounter most from people who care about animals who aren't vegan is they say, well, I understand what you're saying, but, you know, I've got this group or that group telling me that, you know, as long as I'm reducing my intake or as long as I'm buying higher welfare animals and higher welfare animal products, then that's okay. And I think that, you know, I don't think you can underestimate that. When you have Peter Singer, you know, the quote, father of the animal rights movement, end quote, you know, calling consistent veganism fanaticism, or, you know, you have him taking the position. I mean, I just pulled some quotes this morning. You know, Singer saying it's pretty difficult to be a conscientious omnivore and avoid all of the ethical problems. But if you were really thoroughgoing and eating only animals that had good lives, that could be a defensible ethical position. Or he says, I know some people who are vegan in their homes, but if they're out at a fancy restaurant, they allow themselves of not being vegan that evening. I mean, so if you've got the father of the animal rights movement telling you that as long as you are eating animals that have had reasonably pleasant lives and you know, relatively painless deaths, it's really okay. Then it's just a matter of sort of finding the right level of welfare, which is why we now have stores that sell higher welfare animal products, because there's a movement out there that says we discharge our moral obligations if we consume animals that are higher welfare animals.
Well,
yeah, do you recognize that as your movement, folks? One
yeah, I'd be really curious to hear what people think in the comments about that, because I think it is it's a claim to take seriously if we are, you know, in the business of selling compassionate exploitation. I mean, I don't know that those are the words I would use, but I do think there's a risk when we're focusing on the treatment versus use that we could inadvertently or sometimes intentionally be sending that message. And I know that, I mean, that's one of the main reasons we started the Animal Rights Show, you know, at the beginning of 2020, isn't it? To try to clean up our messaging and see if we could align on these things.
Yeah, one question that arises for me, to be honest, is who exactly is Professor Francione talking about? Because who is it who are peddling the compassionate consumption thing? Who is supposed to be not having a consistent position on veganism? You know, who's telling people that, oh, just reducing is enough? Because I mean, the grassroots certainly not going to do that, but some of the more prominent groups that, you know, people may think about, you know, AV, Save, all those, they don't do that either. I mean, it's Joey Carbstrong. I mean, it's isn't that an unequivocal? I mean, I know we've talked about the welfare base of their claims making, but in terms of they don't say cut down, they say go vegan, don't they? So exactly who Gary Francione is talking about is an interesting one in that one, really, I think.
Well, it's kind of a spectrum, isn't it? Because I guess I think, especially, I mean, we've been talking a lot more about his book Rain Without Thunder recently, which is obviously written, you know, more in the 90s, so it is kind of going back a bit. So that, I mean, that's more of a focus on overtly animal welfare groups. But you're right, there is kind of this when the message conflicts. I mean, I think that's along the spectrum of what we need to be talking about, because if we say go vegan after, you know, we need bigger cages, that's still a confused message, isn't it?
Yeah, but nobody does that either, do they? Do they say we need bigger cages, therefore go vegan? So,
well, I mean, I guess it depends. If we start looking at websites, I think there's oftentimes the support of welfare campaigns attached with a vegan message. So there is that. I mean, he mentioned, you know, the father of the movement himself, Peter Singer, who I think we talked before the show. We're curious if you're not sure, if you haven't heard of Peter Singer's work, maybe let us know that in the comments, because I think that would help us to steer the conversation a little bit. But even if we're not familiar with Peter Singer, his ideas did influence the current movement. And he would be in that camp of, reducing total suffering, but not necessarily advocating, sometimes advocating for veganism, but sometimes not. So there's definitely a lot of inconsistent messaging. I think it's maybe a better way to sum it up. But
Yeah.
well, here's an interesting one for you. Linda says Gary Francione can be my global dictator anytime. There's a few things wrapped up in that. What do you think, Roger?
No comments.
Roger's speechless. You've done it, Linda. I've been trying for months.
Well, Linda's talking about Gary Francine, so it's somebody else.
Sure. Well, this is interesting. Veganuary Ambassador Chris Peckham, Sam is saying, has said explicitly eat less meat, referring to abolitionists as ultra-vegans. So that's kind of exactly what we saw in that clip, isn't it? That there's almost this separation between, ultra, I would just say consistent, and people who are looking to reduce. So they really are two distinctly separate messages, aren't they?
On that one, Francione's got a point, because when you start saying ultra vegans, when you start saying purists and this kind of stuff, and when those words, which are kind of like, could be interpreted as kind of like a slur or a bit of a go, they're used to describe consistent vegans. Now that's the problem. So that's what Francione would say, that we don't have a consistently vegan movement, but there are elements of it which would be, and the grassroots would be one. I mean, Gary Francione wouldn't include my type of grassroots as part of the movement, but it still wouldn't chime with eat less meat and anything like that. And obviously we wouldn't go around talking about consistent vegans being ultra vegans or anything like that, because it's just not something we would do, because we ourselves are those people. I just want to point out something about one of the quotes that Francione read out. Interesting, because he stumbled over a couple of words which actually make the quote even worse. And Singer says, "I know some people who are vegan in their homes, but if they are going out to a fancy restaurant, they allow themselves the luxury of not being vegan that evening. I don't see anything really wrong with that." And very similar sentiments are also contained in a article that Singer did for The Vegan. But we are talking about autumn 2006 here. Yeah. So that's that one. So that one, I think it's the what is it, the Mother Jones thing, and then you've got the vegan one there. And again, this word luxury comes up. This idea that it can be a bit of a treat to not be vegan. See, that is bad. But again, you see, in terms of modern day vegans, I don't know many, if any, who go along with that, and yet we're describing Singer as the father of the movement. So whose father is he? He's not my father. Who
Well, and that to me is not even the real issue. The issue to me is that the idea is that promote humane killing as a potential response to the animal question. It's still very much alive in the movement today, and it's ubiquitous through our campaign strategies, even at a grassroots level. If we look at, I think, as most who have been following the show for a bit know, from a language perspective, a lot of our language is inspired by this era of reducing suffering versus actually respecting the individual. And it seems nuanced and subtle, and maybe some people start living vegan because of that. But I think there's a lot of people in the gap that might be left out because of this confusing message that's focusing on treatment versus use. I think going to Nella's quote, maybe we could talk about this a little bit. Veganism, or Veganuary presents veganism as a diet. I hope all these people who sign up for it are exposed to the ethical aspect of it at some point during the month. And I think this is a really strong point, because I don't know about you, Roger, but I would like to. I feel fairly confident that Veganuary does do a net good, even in light of some of these potential critiques about it being more of a diet, or maybe selling it as a 30-day diet. I do think in the end, to Nella's point, hopefully, I mean, I've seen the emails and they are quite good. They do touch on the ethical quite a lot. So hopefully they're exposed to that. And even if people start doing it from a health perspective, they may move on to it, for other issues and hopefully sustain that action. Living vegan.
I mean, for my own position on that one, Jeremy, and I mean, I agree with Nella, but I would think that it's not a question of being exposed to it sometime during a month. I mean, I think it should be there from the start, and I think it should be.
To be fair, I think it is.
So when you say there's,
it sounds like we've got another debate. We haven't done a debate for weeks. I'm itching for one.
Yeah. So give me a for instance. What would you class as some part of their ethical content then?
Well, there. I guess there's two things. What do we consider ethical, and where is it in their content? To me, what I consider ethical is a focus on an animal-centric focus, and I think specifically on an individual. I mean, we just did a brief look at their website before going live, and there are pictures of individuals focused on their homepage. Now, if we look at the language and all that stuff around it, I mean, I have critiques for everything, so I don't know how much that speaks to. I mean, there's always, I think, opportunity to tighten up our language, and I'm not discounting that, but I do think there is an ethical element throughout most of their messaging. But maybe we can do a deeper dive at some point in a future episode. And this is just the primer.
Are you talking about that first picture you get of a young woman cuddling a piglet? Because I mean, the message from that is animal lover.
Well, we're opening all kinds of cans of worms to liberate on this episode.
Debate.
I mean, this hits home for me because my the content that resonates most with me as an individual and as an animal advocate is showing other animals at sanctuary. And I do think that it's not ideal, but I think as humans, we relate more to contact when there's a human almost serving as a conduit there. So I think that I, like yourself, reject the idea of animal lover fully encompassing the idea of animal rights. I think for me, it's much more about respect, or you may say justice. So I think there's a business case for showing humans with other animals. Now, how they show and all this stuff, I think is getting a bit nuanced, but I do think they're back to the original point. We're going to have to retitle this thing to debate. Back to the original point. I do think there's ethics from the start. Now, if we critique how that's being presented is, I think, a separate topic, but I do think animals are being showcased from the start.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that equals ethical position, though. I mean, it's just the fact that they've got some cuddly looking, cute, young other animals being shown sometimes.
So my content, if I do a video with turkeys and kids, for instance, human children, do you think that's ethical content?
Well, as always with this thing, I mean, we've got a difference here. I tend to think that the visuals are not the thing that make it ethical. It's the claims making that goes with the visuals, because you've talked about a welfare image and a rights image, and I think it's the claims making that goes with it that makes it one of those.
For those of you who may have missed, we did a two-parter that's available on both of our YouTube channels around this.
We disagree on this, folks. We disagree on this one.
Sounds like we need a part 3. Until someone emerges victorious, right? But yeah, the general premise is I was presenting that certain imagery, be it a still picture or video footage, that certain content focuses more on ending use, and specifically, I think that's done when we ask ourselves the question, could this be done in a different way that would be more ethical? If we remove that, that's when I think it's focusing more on the use, specifically when we're ending someone's life in a backyard type situation. That's one example of what I use in my footage that I think is more use-based versus treatment-based. And I guess Roger is saying that regardless of the image, it's the language that goes with it. The pushback I did in the debate is that actually the images, the human mind kind of latches onto easier.
I'll say what Roger's saying. Don't you worry about that.
Well, no. I'll just tell you. I'll just tell you what you think. That's a lot more fun.
Actually, speaking
So
of,
I guess you're. I think we're both on board that both are important. It just sounds like I think the imagery is just as, if not more important, whereas you think the language can kind of make up for what I would view as treatment based, stuff focusing on outright cruelty.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's an echo here. This is exactly what the show's going to be about tomorrow, folks. So if you want to tune in tomorrow at 6, then we'll be looking at that. But talking about what people are talking about, there's some pretty good comments, I think. So should we?
Yeah, we should probably move to those before we get into a fiery debate. Which comment would you like to start off with? Because I think this one's interesting from Deb around vegan Facebook page that frequently allows posts about local stores with cage-free eggs, grass-fed beef, so to speak, as if any alleged step forward is gushed over.
Well, ironically, Francione just said that in this webinar. If I don't think it's in any of the clips, but he says it in the full thing, that if you encourage people to take baby steps, then they'll take baby steps. And there's a lot of competing kind of psychological, even cell psychology research on this. We almost need Michelle Lowe at this point, but there's certainly a lot that suggests that foot in the door type thing, asking something small and then incrementally asking for bigger is best. And then there's a lot of research that says being honest and saying what your position is best. And then rather than you kind of like hustling people towards the goal, you tell them what the goal is, and then they then move towards it. So I think there's some interesting kind of competing research. I tend to favor the being honest and tell people what your position is. Position myself.
Well, and just to clarify, the latter position of setting clear end goals, the only research within the space of animal advocacy by Trent Gracian has pointed towards clear end goals, inspiring more change. And because the reality is, even if we advocate for clear end goals, people will still reduce. So it's not like we're eliminating people that would just reduce. They will still reduce. And Trent's research said that they would actually reduce more with a clear end goal. So the whole thing, the whole foot in the door thing, I just think has no place in the animal advocacy discussion. And now I'm on the internet forever saying
but apart from that particular research, which is kind of aimed at our movement, there's more general psychological research that Casey Taft talks about, which says exactly the same thing in more general terms. So that's what I'm saying. There is quite a lot. I mean, a lot of people are a bit wary. Said, "Oh, we can't be honest because we're going to turn people away. Veganism is a scare word, all that kind of stuff." I think we've proven in the last 5-6 years, last decade, that veganism is not a scare word, and so we can drop all that kind of vegan strategist stuff now, I think, and we can just be honest with people and say our position is vegan, and vegan is an ethical position, and it's about justice. I think we can be, and we don't need to hide it. And I would say that it's not that clear on Veganuary. That's all I'm saying. It's not. It doesn't hit you between the eyes anyway.
I'll find you on that common ground. Well, I think Svenja has just said, is Peter Singer even known in the wider community, presumably animal advocate community? I seldomly hear activists talk about Singer or even Francione or Reagan. Most talk about, the more YouTube-centric individuals.
Yeah, but
that's certainly been my observation.
Yeah, a point relevant to that is that when I said who is Francione talking about, when I see modern day vegans, I know that's a problematic term, but I see relatively recent vegans, say on YouTube, they talk about the movement. They're talking about DXC Save, Joey Carbstrong, Earthling Ed, all that kind of stuff. They don't talk about Viva, Animal Aid. They don't even talk about PETA. So there is that kind of generational difference, really. And I suppose it's not surprising that if Singer is the father of anything, he's the father of the likes of Animal Aid and PETA that still sell his book. But and
I would say a father of the language.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
How's that? I mean, I think to me, if I were to put my finger to one thing that he's both responsible for, and I think we need to all critically assess as individuals, is the language. Should we be using cruelty, abuse, suffering, and focusing on treatment? Or should we be talking about breeding, use, killing, and talking about those objective terms?
We're into a very sticky position there, though, Jeremy, because if you were to put all that to someone like Joey Carbstrong, Earthling Ed, they would go, hang on a minute, I'm a strict, ethical, down-the-line abolitionist vegan, right? And that's what they would claim. And so they don't see themselves. I mean, they'd say, I don't agree with anything that Singer said. So Singer's not their father.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Word father about it.
It's a horrible patriarchal show with two males talking about fathers. I would agree with a lot of that. I think that I just know for myself, a lot of language I started out using on reflection does leave a lot of doors to be open. And both of us have spent, hundreds of hours on the street, thousands of individuals. We know that when we give people the slightest opening, and by people I mean non-vegans, public that we're outreaching, they'll take it. They'll focus on how they can, keep using other animals in the right way versus ending their use at any chance. So I would agree that their messages intended to be ethical abolitionists and so on. I think for all of us there's room to tighten up our language, and I find that on a daily basis for myself, and I think everyone's subject to that.
I'm intrigued by the idea that you seem to be suggesting that non-vegans are people. I thought they were monsters and murderers.
I think we're probably going to have to. I'd like to prioritize the comments, so we might not get to the next clip until the next show. Might have to start doing these daily, but we do want to address misanthropy because I do think that's a big part of this. This is interesting. Felix has just pointed out that the Veganuary ambassador who wrote this article still consumes animal products. Which I think is just an interesting thing because it kind of falls into the Melanie Joy concept of vegan allies, which I kind of understand the concept behind. Obviously we don't want to alienate, but I also think we've got to be careful with the message we're sending when we say, if we're suggesting simply to reduce versus to eliminate. I think that's a very different message to send.
That's ironically an interesting point, though, isn't it, Jeremy? I mean, if their claims maker was be a vegan ally for a month, that would be interesting then, wouldn't it? Because it you know what I mean? So it would.
I like that. On the surface, we're recording this live, aren't we?
Yeah. Hey, folks, write that down. Jeremy agreed with something I said.
On the surface, though, I mean, because that's ultimately what Veganuary is. It's not actually suggesting people start living vegan. It's saying, hey, try this out for a month, which we can take that apart. But
it's confusing. It says try vegan for a month, as though you can kind of dip in and out of a philosophy. That's the problem with it.
And what's the alternative? If we were to be solution based, because we wouldn't say try being anti-racist for a month. So it really does come down to human supremacy, which is our main target, isn't it? So are we actually? And it goes back to the earlier point. Are we, selling that compassionate exploitation? If we're saying, oh, we can just reduce a little bit, try it for a month here or there, see how it goes. Yeah. Jacobs is saying about consistency. Every social ideological movement that becomes more mainstream tends to become broader in its message. Broader appeal comes with more diverse views. As a resident sociologist, would you like to opine on that a bit?
Yeah, well, if broader means a more moderate thing, then that would kind of marry in with what social movement theory suggests, and that's the problem of mainstreamness, is the fact that mainstreamness kind of pushes you towards a kind of blanding out of things. So there's a lot of sociology on that. Corey Lee Wren talks about that quite a lot, but it is true, and so it's kind of like it even feeds into that kind of dialogue about we want everybody to become vegan type thing, and so therefore don't say anything that's going to upset anybody. So it tends to be that, well, perhaps that bit of the philosophy needs to be dampened down a little bit, and so you start to kind of censor yourself, and that's what, when Francione in the clip which is shown, he talked about it's not really a movement as much as a group of businesses, which is true. Then you've got a lot of reasons why you've got to be very, very careful. Not you got to be careful because you don't want to, kind of reduce your donor base at this stage. And so that's where you then start thinking, well, what's going to be chopped? Am I going to take the hit in terms of our members and our donor base, or are we going to take the hit in terms of what we're going to say? Because we don't want to upset them. And so if telling the truth equals upsetting people, then it's the telling the truth bit that gets cut out, which is why the grassroots have got a much better track record of being consistent vegans on an ethical abolitionist point of view than the national group structure, which are always kind of, oh, I'm not sure we should say that, and they're kind of edging their bets, and they're let's soften that and all this kind of stuff. You don't tend to get that in the grassroots. You don't have that push towards moderation of language and everything. There's more of a push in the grassroots to say, well, this is it, and so we're telling what it is, right?
Yeah, and I think just building on that point, because coincidentally, this is kind of what we're trying to do with the Animal Rights Show is aligning the movement. I like that, harmonizing the movement. I think it's certainly a lofty goal. I don't know if it's possible. I'd like to try. I'd love to see a movement that, even if it's a subset of the wider movement that's clearly focused on objective language, I think that would be a huge thing, and greater language awareness.
One tricky thing that comes from Jacob's point is the question: is it even necessary? And this gets it into very nuanced, tricky areas, because there is some evidence that non-consistency still results in veganism. Now, obviously, we don't have a control group to say, to test that. But for example, a lot of people will claim that Peter Singer has made a lot of vegans.
Which is probably true.
Yeah, and some people would say Melanie Joy, who presents a vegetarian position, has made a lot of vegans. So is consistency even necessary in a social movement context?
Well, the thing I would push back quite hard on that it's not the people who are living vegan, it's the people who aren't living vegan because of that lack of a clear message, objective language, and the rest of it. So I think that's the group we're concerned about. The people who live vegan regardless, great, we did something right, accidentally almost.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I think that's the answer to the position. It's just that, as I said, if you go through those Facebook things, why did you go vegan? It comes up every 3.5 minutes or whatever. People will, oh, I read Animal Liberation or blah blah. Now, of course, it's much more modern type stuff. But that used to be until recently. Oh, Animal Liberation was the thing, or I got this leaflet from this group or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and Kevin's just saying, as Veganuary professionalized, it became a lot more product focused and pro-veg, more closely aligning with other larger nonprofits and their leaders. And just to make a bit of a pedantic language point, because it's come up a couple in the Francione clip and later, I do think that as animal advocates, I'd encourage us to consider specifically limiting the use of the word product to animal-free products, not when we're talking about animal products, because I do think that implies that other animals are a product, and that's something that's done widespread across the movement, isn't it? Oh, I don't consume animal products. Well, are they a product? We're reinforcing the object status just through that very simple exchange of words that's used all the time.
It means products made from oppressed other animals, doesn't it?
Well, even the use of the word product in and of itself, why not say body or something along those lines? Her body was the her body resulted from da da da. It's
I think it's time for a clip. Time for a clip.
You think you want to try another one?
Yeah, why not? Otherwise, it's just going to be one clip, and then
we do have a lot of so comments or clip. I'll go down to the bottom. Let us know. We're comment. We're here to serve. Would you like us to go through the comments, or would you like us to play the next clip that's queued up? The first person who types comments or clip, we can respond to. We're democracy here.
Is this a game show or something?
So comments or clip, what do we want to see? I think they're on about a 10-second lag out on the YouTube, Facebook University. You're voting clip, I voted comments. Elliot's voted comments.
Oh, yeah.
So there we have it here.
You mean Elliot comments you mean? Is that Elliot you're talking about? Is it?
Well, I mean, I think that the benefit is these clips we'll get to eventually. So I do think it's worth getting through the comments.
Clipments.
The clipments, yeah. Well, yeah, clipments.
That's great.
Hey, Michael. Good to see you again, Michael. Yeah, it's great to see familiar names and just get a bit of a recurring thing going here. Oh, I'm just trying to see where we were. We just had Jacobs, and we're talking about Kevin's comment, and I think this is the next one here. So I see their focus on things like environment as a tactic, but I am increasingly concerned that by shying away from animal rights, they undermine their own goals and patronize their audience. On the topic of the environment, I would highly encourage anyone listening to check out Seb Alex's video on the environment, because I think he does a really good summation. A lot of great content coming out of his channel as of late, but it's around 10 minutes long, I think, so it's a real digestible watch. But I think if I were to summarize, I would say while the environment isn't the focus of animal rights, I think it is obviously within the scope, to use Roger's framing. Because reality, it is an animal rights point. If we're destroying other animals' homes, be it through habitat loss or whatever, building a motorway, that's still a rights violation. It's just not necessarily as direct as breeding, using, and killing them for, so-called food purposes.
Yeah. Point of order. Who's their focus? Who's the there in this?
I believe Sam would probably be referring to Veganuary, because that's the main group that we've been talking about. I'm on about a 15-minute lag on comments, so that would have been Veganuary, I'm quite sure. And I also said something that made sense about 15 minutes ago, so that's exciting to see. What do you think? Can you buy it, Roger?
No.
Nope. Well, I think to Race Lover's point, shoot for the stars and you might land on the moon is a saying for a reason. I think that, when we think about individual personal changes, this is the time for New Year's resolutions, which I'm not a huge fan of. But if we do set that clear end goal of, maybe it's stopping smoking, if we set that as the goal, we might still reduce, but we're gonna do more than if we just say, oh, let's just cut back a little bit. I think, and when we're talking about ethical questions such as animal use that impact others, as animal use does, and that's backed up by the studies. I just don't see any other interpretation than to the earlier point that if we're concerned about donation dollars and upsetting people. But I think when our movement starts to bend to the will of upsetting our audience, that's when it's no longer a movement. We're an echo chamber.
Yeah, well, we saw an increase in people's coming up to the stall saying that I want to go vegan, and they kind of, if you like, knew where they wanted to go. They had a destination in mind, and their destination was vegan, and I always thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, and Jacob's just expanding here as a social psychologist. The combination that would work is being honest and clear with the end goal while helping people with a range of personal goals that they deem achievable. I think that's very well said. Very well said. And I think, as change agents, it's up to us to set that clear end goal. And then absolutely, if someone says, oh, I'm living in the house at the moment and, my parents, work with them with their unique situation. I think because the instinctive reaction as animal advocates is to say, oh, it's easy, just do it. The lines we hear ubiquitously through YouTube, cheapest foods on the planet, just do it, it's easy, I think there are unique challenges. So I think by being willing to go there with people, they're going to be much more likely to overcome those unique challenges versus denying their existence.
Yeah, because I mean, isn't that just almost going back to what I last said about people coming up? That's almost like my goal is veganism. What's the best way? Or can you help me get there? I mean, nothing wrong with that.
Here's an alternative name suggested by Race Lover. I'm just catching up on comments, so if you want to add
I can't see anything. That one catching on myself, that one.
So here's Michelle's just saying, stating a clear end goal isn't contradictory to techniques like foot in the door. You can be clear with what veganism stands for while understanding that some people aren't able to achieve it immediately. And that's where I'm an advocate of these free support programs, because I do think, to have someone's there as a bit of a safety net for the first month, I think it's a pretty strong thing to offer. And to Michelle's point, we can the way I like to frame it is free support to start living vegan. So it's really just clarifying that is the start. It's not saying, do it for 30 days and then, whatever you want to do after that 30 days, do whatever. It's saying, here's a start, here's the end goal. I think there's no reason we can't do both and support the people who are on their way.
Yeah, what Michelle says here is really interesting, because I've never seen that claim before, because usually it's put that foot in the door is almost deliberately not stating the end game, because the end game is seen as a little bit too much. So maybe there's a nuance of that I'm missing, but the classic case is the road safety signs, that people wouldn't accept road safety signs, so you gave them a sticker which said the same thing, and they would put that in the window, and that was the foot in the door, because then you could go back with the road safety signs, and they'd kind of signed up to the idea, and then they were much more willing to put the road safety signs in the garden, because
isn't that kind of, sorry, go ahead.
Well, that was seen as a classic example of foot in the door, as far as I understand it. I mean, Michelle's going to know far more about it, but I've not seen that claim before, because I thought it was the idea that you kind of didn't really reveal where you wanted to go.
That I think is the problem. Like you said, be honest. But I think to respond to that, isn't the January and other free support programs, isn't that kind of a version of the foot in the door? It's saying, here, give this a go for a few weeks, and then hopefully kind of while people are open to that, build on the bigger message.
Yeah, the problem.
But to your point, being honest throughout, which I agree can always be tightened up and
the problem with
reevaluated.
January, if you want to pick out a problem there, and I think that's been reflected in some of the comments, is that the January says try vegan for a month, but it doesn't actually tell people what vegan is, apart from the diet.
I'm not a huge fan of the try vegan thing myself. I mean, I think to Sam's point, that there's actually the author of the article mentioning that we were designed to eat meat, which there's lots of things to unpack there, because that's more of a vegetarian thing. But I think, if nothing, I think that the key message from here is, as individuals, because unless any of us is starting, big campaigns, as individuals, there's serious.
Hang on a minute.
I was going to make a dramatic point, and then we're going to wrap up. What's going on here? Go on. Go on.
This Felix is clearly a cat. I mean, like, I mean, if this person's a human, how did they become a Veganuary ambassador?
Now I know why we keep these things to an hour. They go off the rails inevitably, but oh, well, hopefully Sam wasn't expecting a serious response to this one, but there you have it. We've solved the mystery. We're not going to talk about the whole idea of vegan cats, are we? That's a whole nother one that I don't think either of us is equipped to go to. But yes, as individuals, setting a clear message, I think is to me the key message to take away from all this. Yeah. I don't even know how to respond to that.
Yeah, where do we go now?
Where do we go now? That's a great question. If anybody knows, let us know. Oh, I'm just catching up on these. Nella just said, a loud, clear, and consistent abolitionist message is the way to go, in my opinion. Everything else empowers individuals to hold on to their oppressive habits and beliefs. And I think that's a really key thing, because back to this book that was really the inspiration behind a few of the ideas in the session. How do we tell the difference between an animal advocate and someone who uses other animals when our claims making is the same? And in this book, there's several examples where you literally can't tell the difference. If we're not sending a clear message to end animal use, and we're talking about treating them in a different way, a lot of people who profit from animal use say the exact same thing. So I think we need to have a clear distinction in message. And to Nella's point, a loud, clear, and consistent end all use message. I mean, I think Vegan Pixie Warrior's point is an interesting one to unpack. Different approaches are going to work on different people. The thing I would say with that is, I at least in my experience, I'm not sure what we're talking about when it comes to approach. I think, if we're talking about the ethics versus other things, my response on that is ethics is the strongest motivator. So why not focus on that? Because I think when people are brought in from an ethical perspective, they're going to come across the environmental and other potential bonuses, as I would put it. What would you say on that? Different approaches? I mean, we could also talk about communication, but that's probably not something to get into when we have 10 minutes left.
Well, I think just on the face of it, as a statement, that's bound to be true. You know, different strokes for different folks and all that. We all know that. At the same time, you've also got what you want to transmit as a social movement. What values do we want to put out there? And so you can't kind of cater for everyone in that sense. You've got to be kind of true to the values that you hold. You know, otherwise, you know, you'll put out, you know, yes, neo-Nazis can be vegan or something. And we're not holding ourselves to our values if you try to work out, you know, I mean, like you could almost do that on the street, kind of try and suss out as they approach. Oh, now, you know, is approach number 1, 2, 3, or 4 going to work with this person? You're better off just sticking to what you believe and promoting that. And I think then you've got this idea you get from media sociology then, which is that you can control the transmission of what goes out. You can't control the reception, the decoding of your message. And so I think different people will decode your message in different ways. But I don't think that you can try and go, oh, with that, in that case, we have to put out loads of different messages. Because I think that's just then getting into the animal confusion movement, as Gary Francione would call it then, because you're trying to, you know, it's a little bit similar to that idea about you've got to meet people where they are. Well, they're in McDonald's and they're, you know, they might have oppressive views. Well, you don't meet them where they are. You challenge that. So I understand the point, but I have a problem with it.
Maybe we do because it's come up a number of times. Maybe we do a topic or a live stream around the behavior change model, because that's where the meet them where they are comes from, and maybe we could talk about the different stages. I think that would fill an excellent hour. I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. Palumi has just said about being a vegan abolitionist. Does it also not involve a certain kind of grace of moving away from non-human animals? And specifically around the images of a woman holding a piglet, which we mentioned, also representing humans as the stewards and quite anthropocentric. I mean, I think we covered that in a past team live stream. This has always been a challenging one to me, because I would much prefer to show clips simply of other animals doing amazing things, showing their own unique individuality and why they're worthy of respect. It's really complicated. It doesn't get the same response. And I think we're very human-centric as humans. And I'm not saying bend completely to that, but I think when we design content, if we create something that's going to reach 30,000 people or reach 300,000 people, these are questions we have to ask ourselves. So I don't know. Maybe that's one we could unpack further in a future one, because I agree it's a complicated topic, but I don't think there's a binary one way or the other.
Isn't some of the most popular footage of all, though, Jeremy, the ones that just show other animals doing their own thing and stuff, aren't they? I mean, I know.
Are you referring to like Dodo and stuff like that?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, like I think some of those are really.
So maybe.
Yeah, but
this is when it's like trying to get an answer.
No, well, they're kind of going for
yes,
Disney.
no, maybe.
Yeah, it's Disney and cute and all that with that. No, I'm not going for that. But I mean, certainly when you see, for example,
Dodo
you know,
is.
There's a couple of examples. You know, there's a herd of cows who are kind of, as it were, let out, or they let themselves out, and then they're jumping about with joy. And then there's some apes who were released from a research laboratory, and then they experienced the world at first hand. I had that situation, that story that I tell about, the one that always makes me cry, about the rabbits who I saw touch the earth for the very first time, because they'd been kept in cages until then. And, you know, to tell their story, you wouldn't have to have any humans in it.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think there are examples when we can do it without, and I'm not saying to swerve that. I just think there is a case to be made for including humans as a bit of a conduit to help then draw the focus and still make it animal centric. yeah, that's a recurring topic that I think we'll keep coming back to. I think to Deb's point, what do you think about the term rescue? I mean, I think we're both on board with the whole idea of swerving, vegans being saviors and saving animals and all this stuff. However, I think when we're specifically talking about other animals who are at sanctuary, we didn't really adopt them. We did technically rescue them. So I'm just trying to think of it. I oftentimes use the flip it to test it approach. If a human were in that situation, would we say we rescued them from a dangerous situation? I mean, I think we might. So I think rescue is okay in very limited circumstances, but not across the board, I guess would be my response.
It's a Thunderbirds thing, isn't it? International rescue.
Okay. Just trying to nail down a few of these comments and then we'll wrap up. Chris has just said, is health and environment a better tactic than animal rights for overall less animal consumption, etc.? If it's more popular and means less eating meat, then why is it so bad? I mean, if that's what people want to speak to, I wouldn't necessarily tell them not to. I just know from my personal experience, focusing on the ethics and why seeing other animals as unique individuals is the strongest why for living vegan. And I think they'll come on to those peripheral topics. I think it's less likely that if we start with the peripheral topics, such as environment and health, that they'll come on to the ethics. So that would be my answer there. I think it's similar to some of the things we've been discussing. I don't know if you have anything to add there while I find the next one.
Well, I think it's more. Is that saying don't talk about animal rights or what goes to be animal rights in this movement? I mean, like really, if you were to talk about veganism, for example, like the pioneers of the movement talked about it, they'd incorporate all these ideas together as a general idea about justice, where you even got Eva Batt saying that the soil could be exploited, which I know is a bit of an odd thing to say, but they were basically saying our aim is to help fellow humans, other animals, the environment, and even the soil on which we rely. So they tended to say kind of holistic things, like when Watson said in 45, this idea that the object of the vegan movement was to oppose the oppression of sentient life, and he even said whether it was profitable to do so or not. And so they tended to make pretty wide-ranging kind of holistic points in my view, and so I don't really see it's an either or. I think you can talk about those things. I certainly wouldn't talk about environment and health without talking about the other thing. And you can integrate those things. I mean, the one that doesn't appeal to me so much is the health thing. At the same time, I mean, I've been on the radio saying, well, veganism is a philosophy. It's not a diet. It just so happens that the plant-based diet tends to be exceptionally healthy. So, you talked about the thing, but, you would always bring it back to ethics, and you'll always bring it back.
Well, and I think to Race Lover's point, I mean, it'd be interesting. These stats are available as far as who many, and I presumably, Race, you're referring to vegans from an ethical perspective who started with Veganuary. I mean, I personally know activists who started with Veganuary. So it does work in that sense. I mean, I appreciate that's anecdotal. I knew they do some exit surveys as well. I'm just trying to think of any specific questions because we do like to try to keep these things to the hour mark, which is rapidly approaching. This has been good. I'm going to have to watch this again to figure out what the heck it is we talked about. I'll just flash some of these up on the screen so everyone can, who may have missed, because we are on different platforms, just in case anyone's watching from Facebook and isn't seeing the YouTube comments. I mean, I think we've actually hit a lot of the, the key comments. I think Trash Cark is saying, why not, instead of try vegan, go vegan. I personally like live vegan because we don't have to go anywhere. But I think we're getting into the pretty nuanced things and a bit of personal preference when we get into that. I think go vegan is definitely stronger than try vegan. Be vegan? We don't change our state of being though, do we?
Be vegan. I like that one.
Wouldn't we? What about the bees? Shouldn't we leave them alone too?
Yeah, I know you're going to make a joke like that.
You set me up for that. Was that the easy home run before we send it off? I'm just doing a quick skim. This has been a brilliant discussion in the comments. Please, if there's anything you feel like we've missed, please do. We invite you to leave a comment on either Roger and Mai's or Facebook main video after it publishes, and we'll try to get to them. But I think maybe we'll leave it there.
I know a couple of things we missed, Jeremy, like four clips from Francione. That's what we missed.
5, you mean? I think we've got the next 6 weeks of content. Is what I'm hearing. I think it's probably good to leave it there, and we can pick it up again next week. I think we have some clips to play.
It seems so.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are committed. I saw a few comments that weren't sure on our timing. It is the same time every week, Sunday, 5 p.m. UK time. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you again next week. And we do have the team show tomorrow, which we're doing a bit of divide and conquer. A different cast will be appearing on that one, talking about vegan ads, I believe. So it kind of builds on this topic quite nicely, I think. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.
I'll be back.